down hard, frowning at her silver wine cup. It was full. Surely she had drunk a little. She felt dizzy for some reason. Yes, that sweet young man with those melting brown eyes had refilled her cup. How many times? Not that it mattered. She never drank more than 1 cup of wine. Never. It was being off wave dancer and back on dry land. She was reacting like naive. That was all. Getting carefully to her feet, and refusing the sweet young man's most solicitous offer of help, she managed to climb the stairs despite the way they swayed. Not stopping at the second floor where her and Nynaeve's room was, she went up to the third and knocked on Tom's door. He opened it slowly, peering out suspiciously. He seemed to have a knife in his hand, and then it was gone. Strange. She seized one of his long white mustaches. "I remember," she said. Her tongue did not seem to be working properly. The words sounded fuzzy. "I was sitting on your knee, and I pulled
Hey,
your
OG, how
mustache."
you doing?
She gave it a yank to
Give me
demonstrate
one
that she
second.
winced.
Let me finish this
And my
sandwich and I'll have
mother
the camera
leaned
back
over
on.
her shoulder and laughed at me. "I think it best you go to your room," he said, trying to pry her hand free. "I think you need some sleep." She refused to let go. In fact, she seemed to have pushed him back into his room by his mustache. "My mother sat on your knee, too. I saw it. I remember. Sleep is the big thing. You will feel better in the morning." He managed to get her hand loose and tried ushering her to the door, but she slipped around him. The bed had no posts. If she had a bedpost to hold on to, perhaps the room would stop tilting back and forth. "I want to know why Mother sat on your knee." He stepped back, and she realized she was reaching for his mustache again. "You're a glee man. My mother would not sit on a glee man's knee." "Go to bed, child." "I am not a child." She stamped her foot angrily and almost fell. The floor was lower than it looked. "Not a child. You will tell me. Now." Tom sighed and shook his head. At last he said stiffly, "I was not always a glee. I was a bard once. A court bard. In Camelin, as it happens, for Queen Morgaze. You were a child. You are just remembering things wrong, that's all." "You were her lover, weren't you?" The flinch of his eyes was enough. "You were. I always knew about Gareth Bryn. At least I figured it out. But I always hoped she would marry him. Gareth Bryn and you and this Lord Gabriel Matt said she looks calf-eyes at now, and how many more? How many? What makes her any different from Berylane, tripping every man who catches her eye into her bed? She is no different." Her vision shivered, and her head rang. It took her a moment to realize he had slapped her. Slapped her? She drew herself up, wishing he would not sway. "How dare you? I am daughter of Andor, and I will not be—" "You are a little
Hey,
girl with a
everyone.
skinful of wine throwing a temper tantrum," he snapped. "And if I ever hear you say anything like that about Morgaze again, drunk or sober, I'll put you over my knee, however you channel. Morgaze is a fine woman, as good as ever." "Is she?" Her voice quavered, and she realized she was crying. "Then why did she? Why?" Somehow she had her face buried against his coat, and he was smoothing her hair. "Because it is lonely being a queen," he said softly. "Because most men attracted to a queen see power, not a woman. I saw a woman, and she
Hell
was
yeah, movie
the
fan.
Lord
Definitely
Bryn saw the
appreciate
fire in her, and this Gabriel too. You have to
it.
understand, child. Everyone wants someone in their life, someone who cares for them, someone they can care for, even a queen." "Why did you go away?" she mumbled into his chest. "You made me laugh. I remember that. You made her laugh, too. And you rode me on your shoulder." "A long story." He sighed painfully. "I will tell you another time. if you ask. With luck, you'll forget this by morning. It's time for you to go to bed, Elaine.
Babylon, how
He
you
guided
doing?
her to the door, and she took the opportunity to tug at his mustache again. Like that, she said with satisfaction. I used to pull it just like that. Yes, you did. Can you make it downstairs by yourself? Of course I can. She gave him her haughtiest stare, but he looked readier than ever to follow her into the hall. To prove there was no need, she walked, carefully, as far as the head of the stairs. He was still frowning at her worriedly from the doorway when she started down. Luckily, she did not stumble until she was out of his sight, but she did walk right by her door and had to come back. Something must have been wrong with that apple jelly. She knew she should not have eaten so much of it. Leanie always said she could not remember what it was, Leanie said, but something about eating too many sweets. There were two lamps burning in the room, one on a
Hell yeah.
small round table by the bed,
I
and
just
the
gotta
other
load
on
the
the
ball
white
and I'll be
plastered
right there
mantel
with
above
you.
the brick fireplace. Nynaeve lay stretched out on the bed atop the coverlet, fully dressed, with her elbows stuck out,
Hell yeah.
Elaine noted. She said the
Age always
first
helps.
thing that came into her head. Brand must think I'm crazy. Tom is a bard, and Verlaine isn't my mother after all. Nynaeve gave her a modest look. I'm a little dizzy for some reason. A nice boy with sweet brown eyes offered to help me upstairs. I will wager he did, Nynaeve said, biting off each word. Rising, she came to put an arm around Elaine's shoulders. Come over here a moment. There's something I think you should see. It appeared to be a bucket of extra water by the washstand. Here, we'll both kneel down so you can look. Elaine did, but there was nothing in the bucket but her own
Hell
reflection in
yeah.
the water. She wondered why she was grinning that way. Then
1 second.
Nynaeve's hand went to the back of her neck, and her head was in the water. Flailing her hands, she tried to straighten up, but Nynaeve's arm was like an iron bar. You were supposed to hold your breath underwater. Elaine knew you were. She just could not remember how. All she could do was flail and gurgle and choke. Nynaeve hauled her up, water streaming down her face, and she filled her lungs. How dare you? She gasped. I am the daughter heir of. She managed to get out one wail before her head went back in with a splash. Seizing the bucket with both hands and pushing did no good. Drumming her feet on the floor did no good. She was going to drown. Nynaeve was going to drown her. After an age, she was back out in the air again. Sodden strands of hair hung all across her face. I think, she said, in the steadiest voice she could find, that I am going to sink up. Nynaeve got the big white glazed basin down from the washstand just in time and held Elaine's head while she brought up everything she had ever wanted in her life. A year later, well, hours anyway, it seemed that long, Nynaeve was washing her face and wiping her mouth, bathing her hands and wrists. There was nothing solicitous in her voice, though. How could you do this? Whatever possessed you? I might expect a fool man to drink until he can't stand, but you! And tonight! I only had one cup, Elaine muttered. Even with that young man refilling it, she could not have had more than two. Surely not. A cup the size of a pitcher, Nynaeve sniffed, helping her to her feet. Hauling her, really. Can you stay awake? I am going to look for Egwene, and I still don't trust myself to get out of Tel Iron Riad without someone to wake
I'm
me.
not sure.
Elaine blinked at her. They had
Hey,
looked for
Dream
Egwene
Warrior, how you doing?
unsuccessfully every night since she had disappeared so abruptly out of that meeting in the heart of the stone. Stay awake. Nynaeve, it is my turn to look, and better it's me. You know you cannot channel unless you are angry, and she realized the other woman was surrounded by the glow of Saidar, and had
Let me
been for
see.
some
Let's see if
time,
I
she
can get
thought.
it for you,
Her
OG.
own head felt stuffed full of wool. Thought had to burrow through. She could barely sense the true source. Maybe you had better go.
There we go. I
I
think
will
I
stay
got it,
awake.
OG.
Nynaeve frowned at her, but finally nodded. Elaine tried to help undress her, but her fingers did not seem to work very well when it came to those little
There we
buttons.
go.
Grumping under her breath, Nynaeve
That
managed on
should
her
be
own.
OG's
In owning her
linked
shift,
movie
she
fab.
threaded the twisted stone ring onto the leather cord she wore hanging around her neck, alongside a man's ring, heavier
I
and
guess I
golden.
can't complain too
That was
much,
Lan's ring.
Dream Warrior.
Nynaeve always wore it between her breasts.
Well, I can, but
Elaine pulled the
no one's
low
really
wooden
gonna
stool
care.
over beside the bed while Nynaeve stretched out again. She did feel rather sleepy, but she would not fall asleep sitting on that. The problem seemed to be not falling on the floor. I will judge an hour and wake you.
Hell yeah, Babylon.
Nynaeve nodded, then closed her eyes, both hands clutched around the two rings. After a time, her breathing deepened. The heart of the stone was quite empty. Peering into the dimness among the great columns, Nynaeve had circled Kalendor, sparkling out of the floor stones completely before she realized she was still in her shift, the leather cord dangling about her neck with the two rings. She frowned, and after a moment she was wearing a two-rivers dress of good brown wool and stout shoes. Elaine and Egwene both seemed to find this sort of thing easy, but it was not easy for her. There had been embarrassing moments in earlier visits to Tel Riyadh, mostly after stray thoughts of Lan, but changing her garb deliberately took concentration. Just that, remembering, and her dress was silk, and as transparent as Rendra's veil. Verlaine would have blushed. So did Nynaeve, thinking of Lan, seeing her in it. It took an effort to bring the brown wool back. Worse, her anger had faded. That fool girl! Did she not realize what happened when you drank too much wine? Had she never been alone in a common room before? Well, possibly she had not. And the true source might as well not exist, so far as she was concerned. Perhaps it would not matter. Uneasy, she stared into the forest of huge red stone columns, turning in one spot. What had made Egwene leave here abruptly? The stone was silent, with a hollow emptiness. She could hear the blood rushing in her own ears, yet the skin between her shoulder blades prickled as if someone were watching her. Egwene! Her shout echoed in the silence among the columns. Egwene! Nothing. Rubbing her hands on her skirt, she found she was holding a gnarled stick with a thick knob on the end. A fat lot of good that would do. But she tightened her grip on it. A sword might be more use. For an instant the stick flickered, half a sword. But she did not know how to use a sword. She laughed to herself ruefully. A cudgel was as good as a sword here, both practically useless. Channeling was the only real defense, that and running, which left her only one choice at the moment. She wanted to run now with that feel of eyes on her, but she would not give up so quickly. Only what was she to do? Egwene was not here. She was somewhere in the waste. Roidion, Elaine said, wherever that was. Between one step and the next, she was suddenly on a mountainside with a harsh sun rising over more jagged mountains beyond the valley below, baking the dry air. The waste. She was in the waste. For a moment the sun startled her, but the waste was far enough east for sunrise there to still be night in Tanchico. In Tel Riyadh it made no difference anyway. Sunlight or darkness there seemed to bear no relation to what was in
That's
the
an
real
old
world as
series
far as she
there.
could determine. Long pale shadows still covered almost half the valley, but strangely a mass of fog billowed down there, not seeming to grow less for the sun beating on it. Great towers rose out of the fog, some appearing unfinished. A city in the waste. Squinting, she could make out a person down in the valley, too. A man, though all she could see at this distance was someone who seemed to be wearing breeches and a bright blue coat. Certainly not a Nail. He was walking along the edge of the fog, every now and again stopping to poke at it. She could not be sure, but she thought his hand stopped short each time. Maybe it was not fog at all. You must get away from here, a woman's voice said urgently. If that one sees you, you are dead, or worse. Nynaeve
Oh yeah, it's
jumped,
definitely a good
spinning with the
show.
club raised. nearly losing her footing on the slope. The
You know, I
woman
remember
standing
right.
a
I think
little
it's
above
actually on
her wore a
Tubi,
short white coat and
that
voluminous
free
pale
movie
yellow
app.
trousers gathered above short boots. Her cloak billowed on an arid gust of wind. It was her long golden hair, intricately braided, and the silver bow in her hands that made a name pop incredulously into Nynaeve's mouth. Birgitta? Birgitta,
Oh,
the
he's not
hero of
alive
a
no
hundred
more.
tales, and her silver bow with which she never missed. Birgitta, one of the dead heroes the
He's
Hoyne of
passed
Valir would
away.
call back from the grave to fight in the last battle. It's impossible. Who are you? There is no time, woman. You must go before he sees. In one smooth motion, she pulled a silver arrow from the quiver at her waist, nocked it, and drew fletching to ear. The silver arrowhead pointed straight at Nynaeve's heart. Go! Nynaeve fled. She was not sure how, but she was standing on the green in Ennon's field, looking at the Wine Spring Inn with its chimneys and red tile roof. Thatched roofs surrounded the green, where the wine spring gushed out of a stone outcrop. The sun stood high here, though the two rivers lay far west of the waste. Yet, despite a cloudless sky, a deep shadow lay across the village. She had only a moment to wonder how they were doing without her. A flicker of movement caught her eye, a flash of silver, and a woman ducking behind the corner of Iris Candwin's neat house beyond the wine spring water. Birgitta. Nynaeve did not hesitate. She ran for one of the footbridges across the narrow rushing stream. Her shoes pounded on the wooden planks. Come back here, she shouted. You come back here and answer me. Who was that? You come back here or I'll hero you. I'll thump you so you think you've had an adventure. Rounding the corner of Ilis's house, she really only half expected to see Birgitta. What she did not expect at all was a man in a dark coat trotting toward her less than 100 paces down the hard-packed dirt street.
Yeah,
Her breath caught.
he was into some freaky
No,
shit. He
but
got
he had the
off on
same shape to his face, the
being
same
choked
eyes.
and playing with
Sensing,
himself.
he raised his bow and shot.
So he got found
At
in a
her,
closet.
screaming, she threw herself
Accidentally hung
aside,
himself.
trying to claw her way awake. Elaine jumped to her feet, toppling the stool over backward as Nynaeve screamed and sat up
It
in
wasn't
bed,
drugs.
eyes wide.
It was
What happened,
was
Nynaeve?
it
What
auto
happened?
erotica
Nynaeve shuddered.
asphyxiation.
He looked like
He
lead.
got off on
He
being
looked like lead,
choked
and
and
it couldn't
playing
be
with
killed.
himself, and
She put a trembling
he
hand
was
to her
doing that
left
in the
arm,
closet
where a
and
shallow slash ran the blood a few
accidentally
inches
hung
below her
himself.
shoulder. If I hadn't jumped, it would have gone through my heart. Seating herself on the edge of
Oh,
the
you?
bed, Elaine examined the cut. It is not bad. I'll wash and bandage it for you. She wished she knew how to heal. Trying without knowing might well make it worse, but it really was little more than a long nick. Not to mention that her head still seemed full of jelly. Quivering jelly. It was not Lan. Calm yourself. Whoever it was not Lan. I
Right?
know that, Nynaeve said acidly. She recounted what had happened in much the same angry voice. The man who had shot at her in Emmons Field and the man in the waste. She was not sure they were one and the same. Birgitta herself was incredible enough. Are you certain? Elaine asked. Birgitta? Nynaeve sighed. The only thing I am certain of is that I did
Pee
not
Wee,
fight
he's
with you,
passed away
and
too,
that I am not
but
going
he
back there
he died of
tonight.
natural causes.
She pounded a fist on her thigh. Where is she? What
He
happened
didn't
to her?
die of some freaky
If she
stuff.
met
He
that fellow with the
died just
bow.
because
Oh,
natural
what?
causes.
Elaine had to think a minute. She wanted to sleep so badly, and her thoughts kept shimmering. She said she might not be there when we are supposed to meet again. Maybe that is why she left so hurriedly. Why ever she can't. I mean, it did not seem to make a great deal of sense, but she could not get it out properly. I hope so, Nynaeve said wearily. Looking at Elaine, she added,
Yeah,
We had
it
better get
wasn't
you to bed.
just
You look
any
ready to
movie
fall over.
theater. It was actually
Elaine was
adult
grateful and
movie
helped out of her
theater.
clothes. She did remember to bandage Nynaeve's arm, but the bed looked so inviting she could hardly think of anything else. In the morning, perhaps the room would have stopped its slow spin around the
There's
bed,
probably more of that going on
sleeping
in
as
that
soon as her
theater
head
just
touched the
because
pillow.
him
In the
being who
morning,
he
she
was,
wished she were dead.
he's the one that
With
probably got
sunlight
busted
barely
for
in
it.
the sky, the common room was empty except for Elaine. Head in her hands, she stared at a cup Nynaeve had set on the table before going off to find the innkeeper. Every time she breathed, she could smell it. Her nose tried to clench. Her head felt. It was not possible to describe how her head felt. Had someone offered to cut it off, she might have thanked him. Are you all right? She jerked at the sound of Tom's voice and barely stifled it. I am quite all right, thank you. Talking made her head throb. He fiddled with one of his mustaches uncertainly. Your stories were wonderful last night, Tom. What I remember of them? Somehow she managed a small, self-deprecating laugh. I am afraid I don't remember very much of
No, I
anything
don't think
except
he
sitting there
was.
listening. I seem to have eaten some bad apple jelly. She was not about to admit to drinking all that wine. She still had no idea
He
how
he
much,
wasn't that
or to
type.
making a fool of herself in his room. Above all, not that. He seemed to believe her, from the relieved way he took a chair. Nynaeve appeared, handing her a damp cloth as she sat down. She also pushed the cup with its horrible brew closer. Elaine pressed the cloth to her forehead gratefully. Have either of you seen Master Sandar this morning? The older woman asked. He did not sleep in our room, Tom replied, which I should be grateful for, considering the size of the bed. As though the words had summoned him, Julian came in through the front door, his face weary and his snug-fitting coat rumpled.
Hey,
Only bruise
Vivu, how you
grazed his
doing?
left eye, and the short black hair that normally lay flat on his head looked rough-combed with his fingers, but he smiled as he joined them. The thieves in this city are as numerous as
How
minnows
you
in
been
rivers.
doing,
They
Vivu?
will talk to you if you buy a cup of something. I have talked with two men who claim to have seen a woman with a white streak in her hair above the left ear. I think I believe one of them. So they are here, Elaine said, but Nynaeve shook her head. Perhaps. More than one woman can have a white streak in her hair. He could not say how old she was, Julian said, hiding a yawn behind his hand. No age at all, he claimed. He joked that maybe she was Aes Sedai. You go too fast, Nynaeve told him in a tight voice.
I'm not doing
You
too
do us
bad.
no good if you bring them
Can't
down with
complain
us.
too much.
Julian flushed darkly. I am careful. I have no wish for Leandrin to put her hands on me again. I do not ask questions. I talk. Sometimes of women I used to know. Two men bit on that white streak, and neither ever knew it was more than a scrap of idle talk over cheap ale. Tonight maybe another will swim into my net. Only this time maybe it will be a fragile woman from Kyrian with very big blue eyes. That would be Tamela Kinderode. Bit by bit I will narrow where they have been seen until I know where they are. I will find them for you.
Yeah, I definitely
Or
appreciate
I
it.
will. Tom sounded as if he thought that much more likely. Rather than thieves, would they not be meddling with nobles and politics? Some lord in this city will begin doing what he usually does not, and he will draw me to them. The two men eyed one another. In another moment Elaine expected one of them to offer to wrestle. Men. First Julian and Domon, now Julian and Tom. Very likely Tom and Domon would get in a fist fight to complete it. Men. That was the only comment she could think of. Perhaps Elaine and I will succeed without either of you, Nynaeve said dryly. We will begin looking ourselves today. Her eyes barely shifted toward Elaine. At least, I will. Elaine may need a little more rest to recover from the voyage. Setting the cloth down carefully, Elaine used both hands to pick up the cup in front of her. The thick, gray-green liquid tasted worse than it smelled. Shuddering, she made herself keep swallowing. When it hit her stomach, For an instant she felt like a cloak flapping in a high wind. "Two pairs of eyes can see better than one," she told Nynaeve, setting the empty cup back down with a clink. "100 pairs can see even better," Jewelin said hastily. "And if that Ilianer eel truly sends his people out, we will have at least that many, what with the thieves and cut-purses. We will find these women for you if they can be found," Tom said. "There is no need for you to stir from
One
the
second,
inn.
I'll be right
This
back.
city has a dangerous feel, even if Leandrin is not here. Besides which," Julian added, "if they are here, they know the two of you. They know your faces. Much better if you stay here at the inn, out of sight." Elaine stared at them in amazement. A moment gone, they had been trying to stare each other down, and now they were shoulder to shoulder. Nynaeve had been right about them causing trouble. Well, the daughter heir of Andor was not about to hide behind Master Julian Sandar and Master Tom Marilyn. She opened her mouth to tell them so, but Nynaeve spoke first. "You are right," she said calmly. Elaine stared at her incredulously. Tom and Julian looked surprised, and at the same time disgustingly satisfied. "They do know us," Nynaeve went on. "I took care of that this morning, I think. Ah, here is Mistress Rendra with our breakfast." Tom and Julian exchanged disconcerted frowns, but they could say nothing with the innkeeper smiling at them all through her veil. "About what I asked you?" Nynaeve said to her as the woman placed a bowl of honeyed porridge in front of her. "Ah, yes. It will be no problem to find the clothes to fit both of you. And the hair. You have such lovely hair. So long. It will be the work of no time to put it up." She fingered her own deep golden braids. Tom's and Julian's faces made Elaine smile. They might have been ready for arguments. They had no defense against being ignored. Her head was actually feeling a little better. Nynaeve's vile mixture seemed to be working. As Nynaeve and Rendra discussed costs and cut and fabric, Rendra wanted to duplicate her clinging dress, pale green today. Nynaeve was opposed, but seemed to be wavering. Elaine took a spoon of porridge to wash the taste from her mouth. It reminded her that she was hungry. There was one problem none of them had mentioned yet, one that Tom and Julian did not know. If the Black Aja was in Tanchico, then so was whatever it was that endangered Rand. Something able to bind him with his own power. Finding Leandrin and the others was not enough. They had to find that, too. Suddenly her newfound appetite was completely gone.
Chapter 40. Hunter of Trollocs. Remnants of the early morning rain still dripped from the leaves of the apple trees, and a purple finch hopped along a limb where fruit was forming that would not be harvested this year. The sun was well up, but hidden behind thick gray clouds. Seated cross-legged on the ground, Baron unconsciously tested his bowstring. The tightly wrapped, waxed cords had a tendency to go slack in wet weather. The storm Baron had called up to hide them from pursuit the night of the rescue had surprised even her with its ferocity, and beating rains had come 3 more times in the 6 days since. He believed it was 6 days. He had not really thought since that night, only drifted as events took him, reacting to what presented itself. The flat of his axe blade dug into his side, but he hardly noticed. Low, grassy mounds marked generations of Abaras buried here. The oldest among the carved wooden headpieces, cracked and barely legible, bore dates nearly 300 years old, over graves indistinguishable from undisturbed ground. It was the mounds smoothed by rains but barely covered by grass that stabbed him. Generations of Abaras buried here, but surely never 14 at one time. Aunt Mian, over by Uncle Carlin's older grave, with their 2 children beside her. Great Aunt Eelson, in the row with Uncle Elward and Aunt Magda, and their 3 children, the long row with his mother and his father. Adora, Dizelle, and little Pate. a long row of mounds with bare, wet earth still showing through the grass. He counted the arrows remaining in his quiver by touch. 17. Too many had been damaged, worth recovering only for the steel arrowheads. No time to make his own. He would have to see the Fletcher and Emmons Field soon. Boole Daughtry made good arrows, even better than Tam. A faint rustle behind his back made him sniff the air. "What is it, Daniel?" he said without looking around. There was a catch of breath, a moment of startled surprise, but Daniel Lewin said, "The lady is here, Parent." None of them had gotten used to him knowing who was who before he saw them, or in the dark. But he no longer cared what they found strange. He frowned over his shoulder. Daniel looked leaner than he had. Farmers could only feed so many at once, and food had been feast or famine as the hunting went. Mostly famine. The lady? Lady Fail. And Lord Luke, too. They came from Emmons Field. Perrin rose smoothly, taking long strides that made Daniel hurry to keep
How
up.
you been doing,
He
V-Woo?
managed not to look at the house, the charred timbers and sooty chimneys that had been the house where he grew up. He did scan the trees for his lookouts, those nearest the farm. Close to the waterwood as it was, the land had plenty of tall oak and hemlock, and good-sized ash and bay. Thick foliage hid the lads well. Drab farm clothes made for good hiding. So even he had difficulty picking them out. He would have to talk with those farther out. They were supposed to see that no one came close without a warning. Even Fail and this Luke. The camp, in a large thicket where he had once pretended to be in a far wilderness, was a rough place among the undergrowth, with blankets strung between trees to make shelters, more scattered on the ground between the small cook fires. The branches dripped here, too. Most of the nearly 50 men in the camp
Oh,
were
it's just
young,
cool
were
to you.
unshaven, either an imitation of Perrin or because it was unpleasant shaving in cold water. They were good hunters. He had sent home many who were not, but unaccustomed to more than a night or two outdoors at a time, and not used to what he had them doing either. Right then, they were standing around gaping at Fail and Luke, and only 4 or 5 had longbow in hand. The rest of the bows lay with the bedding, and the quivers too, more often than not.
Have you got
Luke stood idly
Instagram,
flicking the
V-Woo?
reins of a tall black stallion, the very pose of indolent red-coated arrogance, cold blue eyes ignoring the men around him. The man's smell stood out among the others, cold and separate too, almost as if he had nothing in common with the men around him, not even humanity. Fail came hurrying to meet Perrin with a smile, her narrow divided skirts making a soft whisk-whisk as gray silk brushed silk. She smelled faintly of sweet herbal soap and of herself. "Master Luhan said we might find you here." He meant to demand what she was doing there, but found himself putting his arms around her and saying into her hair, "It's good to see you.
Oh, shit.
I've missed you."
That's always better than
She pushed
waking
back
up,
enough to look up at
and
him.
it's like 80 or 90 degrees
You're tired.
outside.
He ignored that. He had no time to be tired. "You got everyone safely to Emmons Field?" "They're at the Wine Spring Inn." She grinned suddenly. "Master Overe found an old halberd and says if the White Cloaks want them, they will have to go through him. Everyone's in the village now, Perrin. Baron and Alana, the warders. Pretending to be someone else, of course, and loyal. He certainly created a sensation, even more than Bane and Chiat." The grin faded into a frown. "He asked me to deliver a message to you. Alana vanished twice without a word, once alone. Loyal said Ivan seemed surprised to find her gone. He said I wasn't to let anyone else know." She studied his face. "What does it mean, Perrin?" "Nothing, maybe. Just that I can't be sure I can trust her. Baron warned me against her, but can I trust Baron? You say Bane and Chiat are in Emmons Field? I suppose that means he knows
Nice.
about them."
And here's
He turned
my
his head toward me.
Instagram name if you want
A
to
few
hit
of the
me
men
up
had
on that,
approached him,
V-Woo.
asking diffident questions that he was answering with a condescending smile. They came with us, she said slowly. They are scouting around your camp now. I do not think they have a very high opinion of your sentries. Perrin, why don't you want Luke to know about the Aiel? I've talked to a number of people who were burned out. Luke was too far to overhear, but he held his voice low. Counting Flan Lewin's place, Luke was at 5 on the day they were attacked, or the day before. Perrin, the man's an arrogant fool in some ways. I hear he's hinted at a claim to one of the Borderland thrones, for all he's told us he's from Murandy. But you cannot really believe he is a dark friend. He gave some very good advice in Emmons Field. When I said everyone was there, I meant everyone. She shook her dark head wonderingly. Hundreds and hundreds of people have come in from north and south, from every direction, with their cattle and their sheep, all talking of Perrin Goldeneye's warning. Your little village is preparing to defend itself if need be. And Luke has been everywhere the last days. Perrin, who? He gasped, wincing. Trying to change the subject, he said, From the south? But this is as far south as I've gone. I haven't talked to a farmer more than a mile below the wine spring water.
Oh, you?
Fael tugged at his beard with a laugh.
I don't know about
News
that.
spreads, my fine general. I think half of them expect you to form them into an army and chase the Trollocs all the way back to the Great Blight. There will be stories about you in the Two Rivers for the next 1,000 years. Perrin Goldeneyes, hunter of Trollocs. Light, he muttered. Hunter of Trollocs. There had been little so far to justify that. 2 days after freeing Mistress Luhan and the others, the day after Vern and Tomas rode on their own way, they had come on the still-smoking ruins of a farmhouse, he and the 15 Two Rivers lads with him then. After burying what they found in the ashes, it was easy enough to follow the Trollocs, between Gaul's tracking and his own nose. The sharp-fetid stink of the Trollocs had not had time to fade away, not to him. Some of the lads had grown hesitant when they realized he meant what he had said about hunting Trollocs. If they had had to go very far, he suspected most would have drifted away when no one was looking. But the trail led to a thicket no more than 3 miles off. The Trollocs had not bothered with sentries. They had no murdroll with them to overawe their laziness. And the Two Rivers men knew how to stalk silently. 32 Trollocs died, many in their filthy blankets, pierced through with arrows before they could raise a howl, much less sword or axe. Daniel and Ban and the others had been ready to celebrate a great triumph, until they found what was in the Trollocs' big iron cookpot sitting in the ashes of the fire.
Oh, shit.
Most dashed away to throw
Now,
up,
that's still
and
not
more
too
than
old.
one wept openly. Perrin dug the grave himself. Only one. There was no way to tell what had belonged to whom. Cold as he felt inside, he was not sure he could have stood it himself, if there had been. Late the next day, no one hesitated when he picked up another fetid trail, though a few mutters wondered what he was following, until Gaul found the tracks of hooves and boots too big for men. Another thicket, close to the waterwood, held 41 Trollocs and a fade, with sentries set, though most snored at their posts. It would have made no difference, had they all been awake. Gaul killed those that were, sliding through the trees like a shadow, and the Two Rivers men were nearly 30 themselves by then. Besides, those who had not seen the cookpot had heard of it. They shouted as they shot, with a satisfaction not much less savage than the guttural Trolloc howls. The black-garbed Murdral had been last to die, a porcupine quilled with arrows. No one cared to recover a shaft from that, even after it finally stopped thrashing. That evening, the second rain came, hours of drenching downpour with a sky full of roiling black clouds and stabbing lightning. Perrin had not smelled Trolloc scent since, and the ground had been washed clean of tracks. Most of their time had been spent avoiding White Cork patrols, which everyone said were more numerous than in the past. The farmers Perrin had spoken to said the patrols seemed more interested in finding their prisoners again and those who had broken them free than in looking for Trollocs. Quite a few of the men had gathered around Luke now. He was tall enough for his red-gold hair to show above their darker heads. He seemed to be talking, and they listening and nodding. "Let's see what he has to say," Perrin said grimly. The Two Rivers men gave way before Fail and him, with only a little prodding. They were all intent on the red-coated lord, who was indeed holding forth. "So the village is quite secure now. Plenty of people gathered together to defend it. I must say I enjoy sleeping under a roof when I can. Mistress Alvear at the inn provides a tasty meal. Her bread is among the best I have ever eaten. There truly is nothing like fresh-baked bread and fresh churned butter, and putting your feet up of an evening with a fine mug of wine, or some of Master Alvear's good brown ale." "Lord Luke was saying we should go to Emmons Field, Perrin," Kenliahan said, scrubbing his reddened nose with the back of a grimy hand. He was not the only one who had been unable to wash as often as he would like, and not the only one coming down with a cold, either. Luke smiled at Perrin, much the way he would have at a dog he expected to see do a trick. "The village is quite secure, but there is always a need for more strong backs." "We are hunting Trollocs," Perrin said coolly. "Not everyone has left their farms yet, and every band we find and kill means farms not burned and more people with a chance to reach safety." Will Alcine barked a laugh. He was not so pretty, with a red puffy nose and a spotty 6-day growth of beard. "We've not smelled a Trolloc in days. Be reasonable, Perrin. Maybe we've killed them all already." There were mutters of agreement. "I do not mean to spread dissension," Luke spread his hands guilelessly. "No doubt you have had many great successes, beside those we have heard of. Hundreds of Trollocs killed, I expect. You may well have chased them all away. I can tell you Emmons Field is ready to give you all a hero's welcome. The same must be true at Watch Hill for those who live up that way. Any Devon riders?" Will nodded, and Luke clapped him on the shoulder with a hollow good fellowship. "A hero's welcome, without a doubt." "Anyone who wants to go home can," Perrin said in a level voice. Fail directed a warning frown at him. This was no way to be a general. But he did not want anyone with him who did not want to be there. He did not want to be a general, for that matter. "Myself, I don't think the job is done yet, but it is your choice." No one took him up, though Will at least looked ready to. But 20 more stared at the ground and scuffed their boots in last year's leaves. "Well," Luke said casually, "if you have no Trollocs left to chase, perhaps it is time to turn your attentions to the White Cloaks. They are not happy at you Two Rivers folk deciding to defend yourselves, and I understand they meant to hang the lot of you in particular, as outlaws for stealing their prisoners." Anxious frowns passed between a good many of the Two Rivers lads. It was then that Gaul came pushing through the crowd, followed close by Bane and Chiad. Not that the Aiel had to push, of course. The men cleared aside as soon as they realized who it was. Luke frowned at Gaul thoughtfully, perhaps disapprovingly. The Aielman stared back stony-faced. Will and Daniel and the others brightened at the sight of the Aiel. Most still believed hundreds more were hiding somewhere in the thickets and forests. They never questioned why all those Aiel stayed hidden, and Perrin certainly never brought it up. If believing in a few hundred Aiel reinforcements helped them keep their courage, well and good. "What did you find?" Perrin asked. Gaul had been gone since the day before. He could move as fast as a man on horseback, faster in woods, and he could see more. "Trollocs," Gaul replied, as though reporting the presence of sheep, "moving up through this well-named waterwood to the south. They number no more than 30, and I believe they mean to make camp on the edge of the forest and strike tonight. There are men still holding to the soil to the south." He gave a sudden wolfish grin. "They did not see me. They will have no warning." Chiad leaned closer to Bane. "He moves well enough for a stone dog," she whispered loudly enough to be heard 20 feet off. He makes little more noise than a lame bull. Well, Will, Perrin said, you want to go to Emmons Field? You can shave and maybe find a girl to kiss while those Trollocs have supper tonight. Will flushed a dark red. I will be wherever you are tonight, Ibarra, he said in a hard voice. Nobody means to go home if there are Trollocs still about, Perrin, Kenley added. Perrin looked around at the others, meeting only agreeing nods. What of you, Luke? We would be pleased to have a lord and hunter for the horn with us. You could show us how it is done. Luke smiled fractionally, a gash on stone that never came close to those cold blue eyes. I regret the defenses of Emmons Field still need me. I must see to protecting your people should the Trollocs come there in greater numbers than 30. Or the Children of the Light. My lady Fayou. He held out a hand to assist her in mounting, but she shook her head. I will remain with Perrin, Lord Luke. Pity, he murmured, shrugging as if to say there was no accounting for women's taste. Tugging on his wolf-embroidered gauntlets, he swung into the black stallion's saddle smoothly. Good luck to you, Master Golden Eyes. I do hope you all have good luck. With a half-bow to Fail, he whirled his tall horse showily and spurred him to a gallop that forced some of the men to leap out of his way. Fail frowned at Perrin in a manner that suggested a lecture on rudeness when they were alone. He listened to Luke's horse until he could hear it no more, then turned to Gaul. Can we get ahead of the Trollocs? Be waiting somewhere before they reach wherever they mean to stop? The distances are right if we start now, Gaul said. They are moving in a straight line and not hurrying. There is a night runner with them. It will be easier surprising them in their blankets than facing them awake. He meant that the Two Rivers men might do better. There was no fear smell on him. There was certainly fear smell on some of the others, yet no one suggested that a confrontation with Trollocs up and alert, and a murderol to boot, might not be the best plan. They broke camp as soon as he gave the order, dousing the fires and scattering the ashes, gathering their few pots and mounting their ill-assorted horses and ponies. With the sentries in, Perrin reminded himself to have that word with them, they numbered nearly 70, surely enough to ambush 30 Trollocs. Van Alcine and Daniel each still led half. It seemed the way to keep arguments down, with Billy Aldai and Kenley and others each heading 10 or so. Will, too. He was not too bad a fellow, usually, when he could keep his mind off the girls. Fail rode Swallow close beside Stepper as they started south, with the Aiel running ahead. You truly do not trust him at all, she said. You think he is a dark friend. I trust you and my bow and my axe, he told her. Her face looked sad and pleased at the same time, but it was the simple truth. For 2 hours, Gaul led them south before turning into the waterwood, a tangle of towering oak and pine and leatherleaf, bushy bay trees and cone-shaped red oil trees, tall round-topped ash and sweetberry and black willow, with thickets of vine-woven brush below. 1,000 squirrels chittered on the branches, and thrushes and finches and redwings darted everywhere. Perrin smelled deer and rabbits, too, and foxes. Tiny streams abounded, and rush-bordered pools and ponds dotted the forest, often shaded but sometimes open, from less than 10 paces across to a few almost 50. The ground seemed sodden after all the rain it had received, squelching under the horses' hooves. Between a large willow-ringed pond and a narrow rivulet a pace wide, perhaps 2 miles into the wood, Gaul halted.
Wait a second, I want to be right back.
If they continued as they had been. The 3 Aiel melted into the trees to make sure of that and bring back warning of their approach. Leaving Fail and a dozen men to watch the horses, Perrin spread the others out in a narrow curve, a cup into which the Trollocs should march. After making certain each man was well hidden and knew what he was to do, he placed himself at the bottom of the cup beside an oak with a trunk thicker than he was tall. Easing his axe in its belt loop, he nocked an arrow and waited. A light breeze blew in his face, swelling and falling. He should be able to smell the Trollocs long before they came in sight. They should be coming right at him. Touching the axe again, he waited. Minutes passed, an hour, more. How long before the shadow spawn appeared? Much longer in this damp, and bowstrings would need to be changed. The birds vanished a moment before the squirrels went silent. Aaron drew a deep breath and frowned. Nothing. On that breeze, he should surely be able to smell Trollocs as soon as the animals sensed them. A vagrant gust brought on a putrid stink, like centuries-old sweat and rot. Whirling, he shouted, "They're behind us! Rally to me! 2 rivers to me!" Behind. The horses. "Fail!" Screams and shouts erupted from every side. Howls and savage cries. A ram-horned Trolloc leaped into the open 20 paces away, raising a long curved bow. Aaron drew fletchings to ear and fired in one smooth motion, reaching for another shaft as soon as his arrow cleared bow. His broadhead point took the Trolloc between its eyes. It bellowed once as it fell. And its arrow, the size of a small spear, took Perrin in the side like a hammer blow. Gasping with shock, he hunched over, dropping the bow and fresh arrow alike. Pain spread out in sheets from the black-fletched shaft. It quivered when he drew breath, and every quiver shot out new pain. 2 more Trollocs leaped over their dead companion, wolf snout and goat horns, black-mailed shapes half again as tall as Perrin and twice as broad. Baying, they rushed at him, curved swords upraised. Forcing himself upright, he gritted his teeth and snapped the thumb-thick arrow off short, pulled his axe free and rushed to meet them. Howling, he realized dimly. Howling with rage that filmed his eyes red. They towered over him, their armor all spikes at elbows and shoulders, but he swung his axe in a frenzy, as if trying to cut down a tree with every blow. For Adora. For Dazelle. "My mother!" he screamed. "Burn you, my mother!" Abruptly, he realized he was hacking at bloody shapes on the ground. Growling, he made himself stop, shaking with the effort as much as with the pain in his side. There was less shouting now, fewer screams. Was anyone left but him? "Rally to me! 2 rivers to me!" "2 rivers!" someone shouted frantically, off through the damp woods, and then another. "2 rivers!" 2. Only 2? "Fail!" he cried. "Oh, light, fail!" A flicker of black flowing through the trees announced a Murdral before he could see it clearly. Snake-like black armor down his chest, inky cloak hanging undisturbed by its running. As it came closer, it slowed to a sinuous, assured walk. It knew he was hurt, knew him for easy meat. Its pale-faced, eyeless stare stabbed him with fear. "Fail?" it said mockingly. Its voice made the name sound like burned leather crumbling. "Your fail was delicious." Roaring, Perrin hurled himself at him. A black-bladed sword turned his first stroke, and his second, his third. The thing's slug-white face became fixed with concentration, but it moved like a viper, like lightning. For the moment, he had it on the defensive. For the moment. Blood trickled down his side. His side burned like a forge fire. He could not keep this up. And when his strength failed, that sword would find his heart. His foot slipped in the mud, churned up beneath his boots. The fade's blade drew back. And a blurring sword half-severed the eyeless head, so it fell over on one shoulder in a fountain of black blood. Stabbing blindly, the Murdral staggered forward, stumbling, refusing to die completely, still instinctively trying to kill. Perrin scrambled out of its path, but his attention was all for the man coolly wiping his blade with a fistful of leaves. Ivan's color-shifting cloak hung down his back. "Elana sent me to find you," I almost didn't, the way you have been moving, but 70 horses do leave tracks. The dark, slender warder seemed as composed as if he were lighting his pipe before a fireplace. The Trollocs were not linked to that. He indicated the murderol with his sword. It had fallen, but still stabbed randomly. More's the pity. But if you can gather your people together, they might not be willing to try you without one of the faceless to goad them. I would estimate about 100 to begin. A few less now. You have bloodied them some. He began a calm survey of the shadows beneath the trees, only the blade in his hand indicating anything out of the ordinary. For a bare moment, Perrin gaped. Alana wanted him? She had sent Ivan? Just in time to save his life. Shaking himself, he raised his voice again. 2 rivers to me! For the love of the light, rally to me! Here! Rally here! This time he kept it up until familiar faces appeared, stumbling through the trees. Blood-streaked faces, often as not. Shocked, staring faces. Some men half-supported others, and some had lost their bows. The Aiel were among them, apparently unhurt except that Gaul limped slightly. They did not come as we expected, was all the Aielman said. The night was colder than we expected. There was more rain than we expected. That was how he said it. Aiel seemed to materialize with the horses. With half the horses, including Stepper and Swallow, and 9 of the 12 men he had left with her. A scrape marred one cheek, but she was alive. He tried to hug her, but she pushed his arms away, muttering angrily over the broken-off arrow, even while she gently pulled his coat away from the thick shaft in an effort to examine where it had gone in. Perrin studied the men around him. They had stopped coming now, yet there were faces missing. Kenley Ahan, Billy Aldai, Tevin Marwyn. He made himself name the missing, made himself count them. 27. 27 not there. Did you bring all the wounded? He asked dully. Is anybody left out there? Bael's hand trembled on his side. Her expression as she frowned at his wound was a blend of worry and fury. She had a right to be angry. He should never have gotten her into this. Only the dead, Van Alsine said, in a voice as leaden as his face. Will looked to be frowning at something just out of sight. I saw Kenley, he said. His head was in the crook of an oak, but the rest of him was down at the foot. I saw him. His cold won't bother him now. He sneezed and looked startled. Perrin sighed heavily and wished he had not. Pain shooting up his side clenched his teeth. Bael, a green and gold silk scarf wadded in her hand, was trying to pull his shirt out of his breeches. He pushed her hands away despite her scowl. There was no time for tending wounds now. Wounded on the horses, he said when he could speak. Ivan, will they attack us? The forest seemed too still. Ivan! The warder appeared, leading a dark gray gelding with a fierce eye. Perrin repeated his question. Perhaps, perhaps not. On their own, Trollocs kill whomever is easiest. Without a halfman, they would probably rather find a farm than someone who might put arrows in them. Make sure everyone who can stand upright carries a bow with an arrow nocked, even if they cannot draw it. They may decide the price is too high for the fun. Perrin shivered. If the Trollocs did attack, they would have as much fun as a dance at Sunday. Ivan and the Aiel were the only ones really ready to fight back. And Fael. Her dark eyes shone with fury. He had to get her to safety. The warder did not offer his own horse for the wounded, which made sense. The animal was not likely to let anyone else on its back. The war-trained horse with its master in the saddle would be a formidable weapon if the Trollocs came again. Perrin tried to put Fael up on Swallow, but she stopped him. The wounded, you said, she told him softly. Remember? To his disgust, she insisted he ride Stepper. He expected the others to protest after he had brought them to disaster, but no one did. There were just enough horses for those who could not walk and those unable to walk far. Grudgingly, he admitted that he was one of the latter. So he ended up in his saddle. Half the other riders had to cling to theirs. He sat upright, gritting his teeth to do it. Those who walked or stumbled, and some who rode, clutched their bows as if they meant salvation. Perrin carried one too, and so did Fail, though he doubted she could even draw 2 Rivers' longbow. It was appearance that counted now, illusion that might see them safe. Like Ivan, alert as a coiled whip, the 3 Aiel looked unchanged as they glided ahead, spears stuck through the harness of the bow cases on their backs, horn bows in hand and ready. The rest, including himself, were a rag-bag remnant, nothing like the band he had led here, so confident and full of his own pride. Yet illusion worked as well as reality. For the first mile through the tangle, vagrant breezes brought in Trolloc stink, the scent of Trollocs shadowing, stalking. Then the stench slowly faded and vanished as the Trollocs fell behind, diluted by mirage. Fail walked beside Stepper, one hand on Perrin's leg as though she meant to hold him up. Now and then she looked up at him, smiling encouragingly, but with worry creasing her forehead. He smiled back as best he could, trying to make her think he was all right. 27. He could not stop the names from running through his head. Kali Garin, Jared Adair, Dale Altarin, and Ren Chandon. 27 Two Rivers folk he had killed with his stupidity. 27. They took the most direct route back out of the Waterwood, breaking clear sometime in the afternoon. It was hard to tell exactly how late, with the sky still blanketed in gray and everything blandly shadowed. High grass pasture, dotted with trees, stretched in front of them, and some scattered sheep and a few farmhouses in the distance. No smoke rose from any of the chimneys. If there was anyone in those houses, something hot would have been cooking in the fireplace. The nearest rising smoke plume looked 5 miles off at least. We should find a farm for the night, Ivan said. Someplace under cover in case it rains again. A fire. Food. He looked at the 2 Rivers men and added, water and bandages. Perrin only nodded. The warder was better than he at knowing the right thing to do. Old Billy Conger, with his head full of ale, was probably better. He just let Stepper follow Ivan's gray. Before they had gone much beyond a mile, a faint thread of music caught Perrin's ear. Fiddles and flutes playing merry tunes. At first he thought he was dreaming, but then the others heard too, exchanging incredulous looks, then relieved grins. Music meant people, and happy people by the sound, someone celebrating. That anyone might have something to celebrate was enough to pick their feet up somewhat. Chapter 41. Among the Tuathawan. A gathering of wagons came in sight, a little off to the south, like small houses on wheels. Tall wooden boxes, painted and lacquered in violent shades of red and blue and green and yellow, all standing in a large, rough circle around a few broad-limbed oak trees. The music came from there. Perrin had heard there were tinkers, traveling people in the 2 Rivers, but he had not seen them until now. Hobbled horses cropped the long grass nearby. I will sleep elsewhere, Gall said stiffly when he saw Perrin meant to go to the wagons, and loped away without another word. Bane and Chiad spoke softly yet urgently to Fail. Perrin caught enough to know they were trying to convince her to spend the night with them in some snug thicket, and not with the lost ones. They sounded appalled at the idea of speaking to the Tinkers, much less eating or sleeping with them. Fail's hand tightened on his leg as she refused, quietly, firmly. The two maidens frowned at each other, blue eyes meeting gray with a deep measure of concern. But before the traveling people's wagons came much closer, they trotted away after Gaul. They seemed to have recovered some of their spirits, though. Perrin heard Chiad suggesting they induce Gaul to play some game called Maiden's Kiss. They were both laughing as they passed out of his earshot. Men and women were working in the camp, sewing, mending harness, cooking, washing clothes and children, levering a wagon up to replace a wheel. Other children ran playing, or danced to the tunes of half a dozen men playing fiddle or flute. From oldest to youngest, the tinkers wore clothes even more colorful than their wagons, in eye-wrenching combinations that had to have been chosen blindly. No sane man would have worn anything near those hues, and not many women. As the ragtag party approached the wagons, silence fell, people stopping where they were to watch with worried expressions, women clutching infants and children, running to hide behind adults, peering around a leg or hiding their faces in skirts. A wiry man, gray-haired and short, stepped forward and bowed gravely, both hands pressed to his chest. He wore a bright blue high-collared coat and baggy trousers of a green that almost seemed to glow, tucked into knee boots. "You are welcome to our fires. Do you know the song?" For a moment, trying not to hunch around the arrow in him, Perrin could only stare. He knew this man, the Mahdi, or seeker of this band. What chance, he wondered. Of all the tinkers in the world, what chance it should be folk I know? Coincidences made him uneasy. When the pattern produced coincidence, the wheels seemed to be forcing events. I'm beginning to sound like a bloody Aes Sedai. He could not manage the bow, but he remembered the ritual. Your welcome warms my spirit, Ringen, as your fires warm the flesh. But I do not know the song. Fail and Ivan gave him startled looks, but no more than did the Two Rivers men. Judging by the mutters he heard from Ban and Tell and others, he had just given them something else to talk about. Then we seek still, the wiry man intoned. As it was, so shall it be, if we but remember, seek, and find. Grimacing, he surveyed the bloody faces confronting him, his eyes flinching away from the weapons. The traveling people would not touch anything they considered a weapon. You are welcome to our fires. There will be hot water and bandages and poultices. You know my name, he added, looking at Perrin searchingly. Of course. Your eyes. Rain's wife had come to his side as he spoke, a plump woman, gray-haired but smooth-cheeked, a head taller than her husband. Her red blouse and bright yellow skirt and green-fringed shawl jarred the eye, but she had a motherly manner. She said, I thought I knew your face. Is Elias with you? Perrin shook his head. I have not seen him in a long time, Isla. He leads a life of violence, Rain said sadly, as you do. A violent life is stained, even if long. Do not try to bring him to the way of the leaf standing here, Rain, Isla said briskly, but not unkindly. He is hurt. They all are. Now, what am I thinking of? Rain muttered. Raising his voice, he called, Come, people! Come and help! They are hurt! Come and help! Men and women gathered quickly, murmuring their sympathy as they helped injured men down from their horses, guiding men toward their wagons, carrying them when necessary. Will and a few of the others looked concerned over being separated, but Perrin was not. Violence was the farthest thing from the Tuathalan. They would not raise a hand against anyone, even to defend their own lives. Perrin found he had to accept Ivan's assistance to dismount. Climbing down sent jolts of pain radiating out from his side. Rain, he said, a touch breathless. You shouldn't be out here. We fought Trollocs not 5 miles from this spot. Take your people to Emond's Field. They will be safe there. Rain hesitated, and seemed surprised at it, before shaking his head. Even if I wished to, people would not want it, Baron. We try not to camp very close to even the smallest village. And not only because the villagers may falsely accuse us of stealing whatever they have lost, or of trying to convince their children to find the way. Where men have built 10 houses together, there is the potential for violence. Since the breaking, the Tuathawan have known this. Safety lies in our wagons, and in always moving, always seeking the song. A plaintive expression came over his face. Everywhere we hear news of violence, Perrin, not just here in your 2 rivers. There is a feel in the world of change, of destruction. Surely we must find the song soon, else I do not believe it will ever be. You will find the song, Perrin said quietly. Maybe they abhorred violence too much for a Taviran to overcome. Maybe even a Taviran could not fight the way of the leaf. It had seemed attractive to him once, too. I truly hope that you will. What will be, Rain said. All things die in their time, perhaps even the song. Isla put a comforting arm around her husband, though her eyes were as troubled as his. Come, she said, trying to hide her ill ease. We must get you inside. Men will talk if their coats are afire. To Fail, she said, You are quite beautiful, child. Perhaps you should beware of Perrin. I never see him but in the company of beautiful girls. Fail gave Perrin a flat, considering look, then tried to gloss it over quickly. He made it as far as Rain's wagon, yellow trimmed in red, with red and yellow spokes and tall red-rimmed wheels, and red and yellow trunks lashed to the outside, standing beside a cook fire in the middle of the camp. But when he put his foot on the first of the wooden steps at the back, his knees gave way. Ivan and Rain more than half carried him inside, followed hurriedly by Fail and Isla, and laid him on the bed built into the front of the wagon, with just room to get by to the sliding door leading to the driver's seat. It truly was like a little house, even to pale pink curtains at the 2 small windows on either side. He lay there staring at the ceiling. Here, too, the tinkers made use of their colors. The ceiling was lacquered sky blue, the high cabinets green and yellow. Fail unfastened his belt and took away his axe and quiver, while Isla rummaged in one of the cabinets. Perrin could not seem to rouse any interest in what they were doing. Anyone can be surprised, Ivan said. Learn from it, but do not take it too much to heart. Not even Arthur Hawkwing won every battle. Arthur Hawkwing. Perrin laughed, but it turned into a groan. Yes, he managed. I am certainly not Arthur Hawkwing, am I? Isla frowned at the warder, or at his sword, rather. She seemed to find that even worse than Perrin's axe, and came to the bed with a wad of folded bandages. Once she had pulled Perrin's shirt away from the arrow stub, she winced. I do not think I am competent to remove this. It is bedded deep. Barbed, Ivan said in a conversational tone. Trollocs do not use bows very often, but when they do, the arrows are barbed. Out, the plump woman said firmly, rounding on him. And you as well, Rain. Tending the sick is no business of men. Why don't you go see if Moshe has that wheel on his wagon yet? A good idea, Rain said. We may want to move tomorrow. There has been hard traveling this last year, he confided to Perrin. All the way to Kyrian, then back again to Giladam, then up into Andor. Tomorrow, I think. When the red door shut behind him and Ivan, Isla turned to Fail worriedly. If it is barbed, I do not think I can remove it at all. I will try if I must. But if there is anyone nearby who knows more of such things... There is someone in Emmons Field, Fail assured her. But is it safe to leave it in him until tomorrow? Safer than me cutting, perhaps. I can mix something for him to drink for the pain. and blend a poultice against infection. Glaring at the two women, Perrin said, "Hello, you remember me? I am right here. Stop trying to talk over my head." They looked at him for a moment. "Keep him still," Isla told Fayil. "It is all right to let him talk, but do not allow him to move about. He may injure himself more." "I will see to it," Fayil replied. Perrin gritted his teeth and did his best to help in getting his coat and shirt off, but they had to do most of the work. He felt as weak as the worst wrought iron, ready to bend to any pressure. 4 inches of thumb-thick arrow stuck out almost atop his last rib, rising from a puckered gash thick with dried blood. They pushed his head down on a pillow, for some reason not wanting him to look at it. Fayil washed the wound while Isla prepared her salve with a stone mortar and pestle. Plain, smooth gray stone, the first things he had seen in the tinker camp that were not brightly colored. They mounded the salve around the arrow and wrapped him with bandages to hold it. "Rain and I will sleep beneath the wagon tonight," the Tuathalan woman said at last, wiping her hands. Frowning at the arrow stub sticking up from his bandages, she shook her head. "Once I thought he might eventually find the way of belief. He was a gentle boy, I think." "The way of belief is not for everyone," Fayil said gently. But Isla shook her head again. "It is for everyone," she replied, just as gently, and a touch sadly. "If they only knew it." She left then, and Fayil sat on the edge of the bed, blotting his face with a folded cloth. He seemed to be sweating a great deal for some reason. "I blundered," he said after a time. "No, that is too soft. I don't know the right word." "You did not blunder," she said firmly. "You did what seemed fitting at the time. It was fitting. I cannot imagine how they got behind us. Gaul is not one to make a mistake about where his enemies are. Ivan was right, Perrin. Anyone can find circumstances that have changed when he did not know. You held everyone together. You brought us out." He shook his head hard and made his side hurt worse. "Ivan brought us out. What I did was get 27 men killed," he said bitterly, trying to sit up to face her. "Some of them were my friends, Fayil. And I got them killed." Fayil threw her weight on his shoulders to push him back down. It was a measure of his weakness how easily she held him. "There will be time enough for that in the morning," she said firmly, peering down into his face. "And we have to put you back on your horse. Ivan did not bring us out. I do not think he cared particularly if anyone but you and he did get out. Those men would have scattered in every direction if not for you, and then we'd all have been hunted down. They would not have held together for Ivan, a stranger. As for your friends..." Sighing, she sat back down again. "Perrin, my father says a general can take care of the living or weep for the dead, but he cannot do both. I am not a general, Fayil. I am a fool of a blacksmith who thought he could use other people to help him get justice, or maybe revenge. I still want it, but I don't want to use anyone else for it any longer. Do you think the Trollocs will go away because you decide your motives are not pure enough?" The heat in her voice made him raise his head, but she pushed it back to the pillow almost roughly. "Are they any less vile? Do you need a purer reason to fight them than what they are? Another thing my father says. The worst sin a general can commit, worse than blundering, worse than losing, worse than anything, is to desert the men who depend on him." A tap came at the door, and a slender, handsome tinker in a red and green striped coat put his head in. He flashed a smile at Fayil, all white teeth and oozing charm, before looking at Perrin. "Grandfather said it was you. I thought this was where Egwene said she came from." He frowned suddenly, disapprovingly. "Your eyes. I see you have followed Elias after all, to run with the wolves. I was sure you would never find the way of belief." Perrin knew him. Aram, Rain and Isla's grandson. He did not like him. He smiled like Will. Go away, Aram. I'm tired. Is Egwene with you? Egwene's Aes Sedai now, Aram. Well, and she would rip your heart out with the one power if you asked her to dance. Go away. Aram blinked and hastily shut the door, with himself outside. Perrin let his head fall back. He smiles too much. I cannot abide a man who smiles too much. Fail made a choking noise, and he looked at her suspiciously. She was biting her underlip. I have something in my throat, she said in a strangled voice, getting up hastily. She hurried to the wide shelf below the foot of the bed where Isla had prepared her poultice and stood with her back to him, pouring water from a green and red pitcher into a blue and yellow mug. Would you like something to drink, too? Isla left this powder for the pain. It will help you sleep. I don't want any powder, he said. Fail. Who is your father? Her back went very stiff. After a moment, she turned with the mug in both hands and an unreadable look in her tilted eyes. Another minute passed before she said, My father is Davram of House Bashir, Lord of Bashir, Tyr, and Sedona, guardian of the Blight Border, defender of the Heartland, Marshal General to Queen Tenobia of Saldaia, and Light. What was all that about him being a wood merchant or a fur dealer? I seem to remember him dealing in ice peppers once, too. It was not a lie, she said sharply. Then in a weaker voice, just not the full truth. My father's estates do produce lumber and fine woods, and ice peppers and furs and more besides. And his stewards sell them for him, so he does trade in them. In a way. Why couldn't you just tell me? Hiding things. Lying. You're a lady. He frowned at her accusingly. He had not expected this. A small merchant for a father, a former soldier maybe, but not this. Light, what are you doing running around as a hunter of the horn? Don't tell me the Lord of Bashir and all that just sent you off to find adventure. Still holding the cup, she came back to sit beside him. For some reason, she seemed very intent on his face. My two older brothers died, Perrin. One fighting Trollocs, the other in a fall from his horse hunting. That made me the eldest. And it meant I had to study account books and trading. While my younger brothers learned to be soldiers, while they were being readied for adventures, I had to learn how to manage the estates. It is the eldest's duty. Duty. It is dull, drying, and boring. Buried in paper and clerks. When Father took Maiden with him to the Blight Border, he's 2 years younger than I. That was more than I could stand. Girls are not taught the sword or war in Saldaia, but Father had named an old soldier from his first command as my footman, and Aaron was always more than happy to teach me to use knives and fight with my hands. I think it amused him. In any case, when Father took Maiden with him, the news had arrived calling the great hunt of the Horn. So I left. I wrote Mother a letter explaining, and I left. And I reached Ilion in time to take the oath of a hunter. Picking up the cloth, she patted at the sweat on his face again. You really should sleep if you can. I suppose you are the Lady Bashir or some such, he said. How did you ever come to like a common blacksmith? The word is love, Perrin Ebara. The firmness of her voice was at sharp odds with the gentle way that the cloth moved on his face. And you are not such a common blacksmith, I think. The cloth paused. Perrin, what did that fellow mean about running with wolves? Rain mentioned this Elias too. For a moment he was frozen, unbreathing. Yet he had just berated her for keeping secrets from him. It was what he got for being hasty and angry. Swing a hammer in haste, and you usually hit your own thumb. He exhaled slowly and told her how he had met Elias Machira and learned he could talk to wolves, how his eyes had changed color, grown sharper, and his hearing and his sense of smell like a wolf's. About the wolf dream, about what would happen to him if he ever lost his hold on humanity. It's so easy. Sometimes, especially in a dream, I forget I'm a man, not a wolf. If one of these times I don't remember quickly enough, if I lose hold, I'll be a wolf. In my head, at least. A sort of half-wrong image of a wolf. There won't be anything of me left. He stopped, waiting for her to flinch, to move away. If your ears are really that sharp, she said calmly, I'll have to watch what I say close to you. He caught her hand to stop her patting. Did you hear anything I said? What will your father and mother think by you? A half-wolf blacksmith. You're a lady. Light. I heard every word. Father will approve. He has always said our family blood is growing too soft. Not like it was in the old days. I know he thinks I am terribly soft. She gave him a smile, fierce enough for any wolf. Of course, Mother always wanted me to marry a king who splits Trollocs in two with one stroke of his sword. I suppose your axe will suffice, but could you tell her you are the king of the wolves? I don't think anyone will come forward to dispute your claim to that throne. In truth, the splitting of Trollocs will probably do for Mother, but I truly think she would like the other. Light, he said hoarsely. She sounded almost serious. No, she did sound serious. If she was even half serious, he was not sure the Trollocs might not be better than meeting her parents. Here, she said, holding the mug of water to his lips. You sound as though your throat is dry. Swallowing, he spluttered at the bitter taste. She had stirred in Isla's powder. He tried to stop, but she filled his mouth, and it was a matter of swallow or choke. By the time he could push the mug away, she had emptied half of it into him. Why did medicine always taste so vile? He suspected women did it on purpose. He would have bet that whatever they took for themselves did not taste that way. I told you I did not want any of that. Gah! Did you? I must not have heard. But whether you did or not, you need sleep. She stroked his curly hair. Sleep, my parent. He tried to tell her he had indeed told her so, and she had heard it. But the words seemed to tangle around his tongue. His eyes wanted to slide shut. In fact, he could not keep them open. The last thing he heard was her soft murmurs. Sleep, my wolf king. Sleep. Chapter 42. A Missing Leaf. Perrin stood near the Tuathalan wagons under bright sunlight, alone, and there was no arrow in his side, no pain. Among the wagons, firewood was stacked, ready to be lit beneath iron cookpots, hanging from tripods, and clothes hung from wash lines. There were no people or horses. He wore neither coat nor shirt, but a blacksmith's long leather vest that left his arms bare. It could have been any dream, perhaps, except that he was aware it was a dream. And he knew the feel of the wolf dream, the reality and solidity of it. From the long grass around his boots to the breeze out of the west that ruffled his curly hair, to the scattered ash and hemlock. The tinker's gaudy wagons did not seem real, though. They had an air of insubstantiability, a feel that they might shimmer and be gone any moment. They never remained long in one place, tinkers. No soil held them. Wondering how much the land held him, he rested a hand on his axe and looked down in surprise. The heavy blacksmith's hammer hung in the loop on his belt, not the axe. He frowned. Once he would have chosen that way, had even thought he had, but surely no more. The axe. He had chosen the axe. Hammerhead suddenly became half moonblade, and thick spike, flickered back to stout cylinder of cold steel, fluttered between. Finally it stopped, as his axe, and he exhaled slowly. That had never happened before. Here he could change things as he wanted with ease. Things about himself, at least. "And I want the axe," he said firmly. "The axe." Looking around, he could just see a farmhouse to the south and deer browsing the barley field, surrounded by a rough stone wall. There was no feel of wolves, and he did not call Hopper. The wolf might or might not come, or even hear, but Slayer could well be out there somewhere. A bristling quiver abruptly tugged at his belt opposite the axe, and he had a stout longbow in his hand with a broadhead arrow nocked. A long leather bracer covered his left forearm. Nothing moved except those deer. "Not likely I'll wake soon," he muttered to himself. Whatever that stuff was that Fail had fed him, it had taken him right off. He remembered it as clearly as if he had watched over her shoulder. "Fed it to me like I was a babe," he growled. "Women." He took one of those long strides, the land blurred around him, and stepped into the farmyard. 2 or 3 chickens scattered, running as if they had already gone feral. The rock-walled sheepfold stood empty, and both thatched-roof barns were barred shut. Despite curtains still at the windows, the 2-story farmhouse had the look of emptiness. If this was a true reflection of the waking world, and the wolf dream usually was, in an odd way, the people here had been gone for days. Fail was right. His warning had spread beyond the places he had gone. "Fail," he murmured wonderingly. "Daughter of a lord. No, not just a lord. 3 times a lord, a general, and uncle to a queen. Light, that makes her a queen's cousin. And she loved a simple blacksmith. Women were wondrous strange." Seeking to see how far the word had spread, he zigzagged more than halfway to Devon Ride, a mile or so at a stride, doubling back and crisscrossing his own path. Most farms he saw had that same emptiness. Less than 1 in 5 showed signs of habitation, doors open and windows up, wash hung out on a line, dolls or hoops or carved wooden horses lying around a doorstep. The toys especially made his stomach clench. Even if they had not believed his warning, surely there were enough burned farms about to tell them the same. Tumbled heaps of charred timbers, soot-black chimneys like stark dead fingers. Bending to replace a doll with a smiling glass face and a flower-embroidered dress, some woman had loved her daughter to do all that tiny needlework. He blinked. The same doll still sat on the fieldstone steps where he had picked it up. As he reached out, the one in his hand faded and vanished. Flashes of black in the sky cut short his amazement. Ravens, 20 or 30 together, winging toward the westward, toward the mountains of mist, where he had first seen Slayer. He watched coldly while the ravens dwindled to black specks and disappeared. Then he set off after them. Long racing strides carried him 5 miles each, the land a blur except in the moment between one step and the next, into the thick-treed, rocky westwood, across the scrub-covered sandhills, into the cloud-capped mountains, where fir and pine and leatherleaf forested valleys and slopes, to the very valley where he had first seen the man Hopper called Slayer, to the mountainside where he had returned from Tyr. The waygate stood there, closed. The Avendasora leaf seemingly just one among a myriad of intricately carved leaves and vines. Scattered trees, wizened and wind-sculpted, dotted the sparse soil along the glazed stone where Manetheren had been burned away. Sunlight sparkled on the waters of the Manetheren Grell below. A faint wind up the valley brought in the scent of deer, rabbits, foxes. Nothing moved that he could see. On the point of leaving, he stopped. The Avendasora leaf. 1 leaf. Loyal had locked the waygate by placing both leaves on this side. He turned, and his hackles rose. The waygate stood open, twin masses of living greenery stirring in the breeze, exposing that dull, silvery surface. His reflection shimmered in it. How? He wondered. Loyal locked the bloody thing. Unaware of crossing the distance, suddenly he was right at the way gate. There was no trefoil leaf among the verdant tangle on the inside of the two gates. Strange to think that at that moment in the waking world, someone or something was passing through where he stood. Touching the dull surface, he grunted. It might as well have been a mirror. His hand slid across it as across the smoothest glass. From the corner of his eye, he caught the Aventador leaf suddenly in its place on the inside, and leaped back just as the waygate began swinging shut. Someone or something had come out and gone in. Out. It has to be out. He wanted to doubt that it was more Trollocs and Fades coming into the two rivers. The gates merged, became stone carvings again. A sense of being watched was all the warning he had. He jumped, a half-seen image of black streaking through where his chest had been, an arrow. Jumped in one of those world-blurring stretches, landed on a far slope, and jumped again, out of the valley of Manethran into a stand of towering fir, and again. Running, he thought furiously, picturing the valley in his mind, and that brief glimpse of the arrow. It had come from that direction, at that angle when it reached him. So it had to have come from... A final bound took him back onto a slope above Manethran's grave, crouching among meager, wind-slanted pines, with bow ready to draw. Below him, among the stunted trees and boulders, the arrow had been fired. Slayer had to be down there somewhere. He had to be down... Without thinking, Perrin leaped away, the mountains a smear of gray and brown and green. Almost, he growled. Almost, he had duplicated his mistake in the waterwood. Thinking again an enemy would move to suit him, wait where he wanted. This time he ran as hard as he could, only 3 flashing strides to the edge of the sandhills, hoping he had not been seen. This time he circled wide, coming back higher on that same mountainside, up where the air felt thin and cold and the few trees were thick-trunked bushes 50 paces or more apart. Up above where a man might set himself to watch for another who meant to sneak up on the place that arrow had fired. And there his quarry was. 100 paces below, dark-haired and dark-coated, a tall man crouched beside a table-sized granite outcrop, his own half-drawn bow in hand, studying the slope farther down with eager patience. This was the first time Perrin had gotten a good look at him. 100 paces was little distance for his eyes. This Slayer's high-collared coat had a borderland cut, and his face looked enough like Lan's to be the warder's brother's. Only Lan had no brothers, no living kin at all that Perrin knew. And if he had had any, they would not have been here. A borderlander, though, maybe a Shienaran, though his hair was long, not shaved to a topknot, and was held back by a braided leather cord just like Lan's. He could not be Malkiri. Lan was the last living Malkiri. Wherever he came from, Perrin felt no compunction at all in drawing his bow, broadhead point aimed at Slayer's back. This man had tried to kill him from ambush. A downhill shot could be tricky. Perhaps he had taken too long, or perhaps the fellow felt his cold gaze, but suddenly Slayer became a blur, streaking away east. With a curse, Perrin pursued. 3 strides to the sandhills, another into the westwood. Among the oaks and leatherleaf and underbrush, Slayer seemed to vanish. Halting, Perrin listened. Silence. The squirrels and birds had gone still. He inhaled deeply. A small herd of deer had passed that way not long since, and a faint tinge of something, human but too cold for a man, too emotionless, a scent that tickled his mind with familiarity. Slayer was somewhere close. The air lay as still as the forest, no stir of breeze to tell him which way that scent came. A neat trick, Golden Eyes, locking the waygate. Perrin tensed, ears straining. No telling from where in this dense growth that voice had come. Not so much as a leaf rustled. If you knew how many of the shadow-wrought died trying to get out of the ways there, it would lift your heart. Machin Shin feasted at that gate, Golden Eyes. But not a good enough trick. You saw. The gate is open now. There, off to the right. Perrin slipped through the trees as silently as he had when he had hunted here. It was only a few hundred to begin, Golden Eyes. Just enough to keep those fool white cloaks off balance and see that the renegade died. Slayer's voice became angry. The shadow consume me if that man does not have more luck than the White Tower. Abruptly he chuckled. With you, Golden Eyes, your presence was a surprise. There are those who want your head on a pike. Your precious 2 rivers will be harrowed from end to end now to root you out. What do you say to that, Golden Eyes? Perrin froze close beside the gnarled trunk of a great oak. Why was the man talking so much? Or was he talking at all? He was drawing me right to him. Putting his back against the oak's thick bole, he studied the forest. No movement. Slayer wanted him to come nearer. No doubt into an ambush. And he wanted to find the man and rip his throat out. Yet it could easily be himself who died. And if that happened, no one would know the waygate was open, and Trollocs coming by hundreds, maybe even thousands. He would not play Slayer's game. With a mirthless smile, he stepped out of the wolf dream, telling himself to wake, and Fail twined her arms around his neck and nipped his beard with small white teeth, while Tinker's fiddles sang some wild, heated tune around the campfires. Isla's powder. I can't wake up. Awareness that it was a dream faded. Laughing, he scooped Fail up in his arms and carried her into the shadows where the grass was soft. Waking was a slow process, wrapped around the dull pain filling his side. Daylight streamed in at the small windows. Bright light. Morning. He tried to sit up and fell back with a groan. Fail sprang up from a low stool. Her dark eyes looked as if she had not slept. Lie still, she said. You did enough thrashing in your sleep. I have not kept you from rolling over and driving that thing the rest of the way through you, just to watch you do it now you're awake. Ivan stood leaning against the doorframe, like a dark blade. Help me up, Perrin said. Talking hurt, but so did breathing, and he had to talk. I have to get to the mountains, to the waygate. She put a hand to his forehead, frowning. Fever, she murmured. Then more strongly, you are going to Emmons Field where one of the Aes Sedai can heal you. You are not going to kill yourself trying to ride into the mountains with an arrow in you. Do you hear me? If I hear one more word about mountains or waygates, I will have Isla mix something that will put you back to sleep, and you will travel on a litter. I am not certain you should not anyway. The Trollocs, Fail. The waygate is open again. I have to stop them. The woman did not even hesitate before shaking her head. You can do nothing about it, the state you are in. It is Emmons Field for you. But me no buts, Perrin Aybara. Not another word on it. He ground his teeth. The worst was that she was right. If he could not rise from a bed alone, how could he stay in the saddle as far as Manetheren? Emmons Field, he said graciously, but she still sniffed and muttered something about pig-headed. What did she want? I was bloody gracious. Burn her for stubborn. So there will be more Trollocs, Ivan said musingly. He did not ask how Perrin knew. Then he shook his head as if dismissing Trollocs. I will tell the others you are awake. He slipped out, closing the door behind him. Am I the only one who sees the danger? Perrin muttered. I see an arrow in you, Fail said firmly. The reminder gave him a twinge. He just stifled a groan. and she gave a satisfied nod. Satisfied. He wanted to be up and on the way immediately. The sooner he was healed, the sooner he could see to closing the way gate again. Permanently this time. Fail insisted on feeding him breakfast, a broth thick with mashed vegetables, suitable for a toothless infant, 1 spoon at a time, with pauses to wipe his chin. She would not let him feed himself, and whenever he protested or asked her to go faster, she shoved the words back into his mouth with a spoonful of pap. She would not even let him wash his own face. By the time she got around to brushing his hair and combing his beard, he had settled on dignified silence. "You are pretty when you sulk," she said, and pinched his nose. Isla, in green blouse and blue skirt this morning, climbed into the wagon with his coat and shirt, both cleaned and mended. To his irritation, he had to let the 2 women help him don them. He had to let them help him sit up to don them. The coat unbuttoned and the shirt not tucked in, but bunched around the arrow stub. "Thank you, Isla," he said, fingering the neat darns. "This is fine needlework." "It is," she agreed. "Fail has a deft touch with a needle." Fail colored, and he grinned, thinking of how fiercely she had told him she would never mend his clothes. A glint in her eye held his tongue. Sometimes silence was the wiser course. "Thank you, Fail," he said gravely instead. She blushed even redder. Once they had him on his feet, he reached the door easily enough, but he had to help support him to climb down the wooden steps. At least the horses were saddled, and all the 2 Rivers lads gathered, bows slung on their backs. With clean faces and clothes, and only a few bandages out where they showed. The night with the Tuathuan had obviously been good for their spirits, too, even those who still looked as though they could not walk 100 paces. The haggardness that had been in their eyes yesterday was only a shadow now. Will had each arm around a pretty big-eyed tinker girl, of course, and Van Leeuwen, with his nose and a bandage around his head, making his dark hair stand up in a brush, held hands with another, smiling shyly. Most of the others held bowls of thick vegetable stew and spoons, shoveling away. "This is good, Baron," Daniel said, giving up his empty bowl to a tinker woman. She gestured as if to ask the beanpole fellow whether he wanted more, and he shook his head, but said, "I don't think I could ever get enough of it, do you?" "I had my fill."
Alright, everyone, I'm gonna call into this stream for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone continues to stop by. I definitely appreciate all y'all's support. Till next time, everyone, y'all stay safe out there.